Alright guys, we're ready to get started. We're going to try something new this time, and that we're going to be live streaming on Google+. So this will be interesting, and hopefully all goes well. People will be able to ask questions, so I don't know if anyone will actually chime in, but if you're watching and you want to ask some questions, I'll try to follow along, and then maybe at the end we can ask Brian. So this month we are excited to have Brian. He's going to talk about the dark side of UX, and we're really excited about it. And I will all the attention in the slides, and so take it away, Brian.
Just punch the other one. All right. So we're going to be talking about the dark side of UX. I am a huge Star Wars nut. Some of you might know. Multiple cardboard cutouts. I am not ashamed to say I'm super excited about Star Wars coming out in December. So I just named this dark side of UX. So one of the questions that everyone probably wants to ask is, what the heck is UX? It's probably one of the most used buzzwords nowadays. If you ever look at any application anywhere, it's always user experience, whether it's specifically the role or some sort of experience with it. It is the buzzword of yesteryear. So what exactly is it? Well, a good way to kind of describe UX is what you learned back in school. So who, what, where, when, why. For this instance, I'm going to leave out how for now, because that's not super important to UX, and I'll explain a little bit later. But essentially, it's every single touch point to the user. So whether that's your consumer, your internal team that's using the software you're developing, or whatever, it is every single little facet of the product that you're working on, or the project that you're working on. So everything that actually someone could have an experience with, or do in some way, or relate to in some way, it's super important. So it's pretty much every touch point. So just for an example, who is maybe your audience? What is maybe your actual product or service if you're selling something? A where might be the place it resides, the software it lies in. A when might be time it operates or functions. And then what is the benefit of the user or the client is possibly the client. UX, there's a million different things out there for UX. It's kind of this broad term that's overused, but it really can apply to a lot of different situations. So, like I said, a good way to describe it is all the W's without the how. And that's because typically how makes sense more for UI. So UI and UX are commonly interchangeable in the industry, which they're not. They're completely separate things. UI is very specific, UX is all-encompassing. So the how is kind of makes sense for UI in the sense that it is physically how someone is operating something, doing something, getting somewhere, flowing through something. It is the how that they do something with your product and service. UX is everything from the very beginning all the way to the very end, and all the testing in between. So it's a very polar opposite between those two, which a lot of people don't really respect whenever they're talking about UI, UX. They normally say UI/UX, which is a kind of bastardization of both of them. So an example of like a UI test would be a test in like product flow, or like graphical elements on the page, or possibly how someone reacts with certain controls on the page, maybe with certain CTAs, something like that. That makes sense for UI. It's actually the user interface that they're working with. They're changing it up, making an icon easily recognizable to the masses, versus some arbitrary hamburger button that doesn't make any sense if it's in the wrong situation. So that's kind of UI, not UX. So let's just go over a typical workflow for a UX designer. There's a million of them out there. If you Google it, you'll see a million different options. A typical UX designer would start from the very, very beginning. In perfect scenario, we always talk about, workflows and everything. Perfect scenario, UX designer starts out with the very need. They start out before the project's even worked on, before the project's conceptualized, before the project ever starts. UX is there at the very beginning to validate the idea and test and see if it makes sense. Because
they can actually get in there and test with users whether that concept works, and if it doesn't, why spend money on it, why build it? So if a user experience designer is there at the very beginning, it can save a lot of time, frustration, and money. As I'm sure a lot of you developers know, it really sucks whenever you're building something and then halfway through the design completely changes because someone found out somewhere that it didn't make sense for the scenario, for the business case, or whatever. No forethought went into it at the very beginning, so they changed it later. So if you have a user experience designer there at the very beginning, validating all that stuff, then you save a lot of headache. They do a lot of research. So they're going to look at business trends, the industry as a whole, and then other case studies that have already happened. They're going to be using user personas, which is really kind of important in UX. User personas are taking the average user of the product, so the average person that's using the product, not outlier cases, and they're personifying them with a figure. Normally, like, they name them. Normally, they'll take a picture, like have a picture of. Someone's gone so far as to like get a giant pop thing on the wall and paste it on the wall because that is their user and they can identify with it. So they'll do like demographics, psychographics on that. They're involved in information architecture, how the information actually flows through the product or application or whatever. They'll actually do the content development and copywriting. There'll be little touch points through everything. They're not doing everything. The copywriter is doing copywriting, but they will be involved with that initial conversation to make sure that it all flows together in one cohesive pretty package. They're highly integral in testing and analysis, so they will be doing testing from the very beginning, from the concept stages like I talked about, all the way through post-production, whenever it's already launched, how can we make it better, how can you improve it, what are users not liking, what are they liking. And then iteration. Iteration just goes along with testing. Iteration, 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 constantly testing, constantly changing things, because that's how you make it better. So that's the typical, like, that's just the one scenario of a user experience workflow. So if it's kind of confusing still at this point, it's because it kind of is. There are a million different ideas of what the heck it is. Technically, my team at Randall Riley is the interaction design team. We do a lot more than that, but that's just what we're called. A lot of groups are called user experience design teams, but really they just do UI. A lot of UI people are actually UX. A lot of developers are designers. They're doing UX stuff. They just don't call it UX. A lot of these principles are very common sense. They make a lot of sense, but a lot of times it takes assigning someone that specific role to focus on it for it to actually be dedicated to it and actually come up with a lot of benefit from it. So if it is kind of confusing, that's well because it is. So I want to talk a little bit about the dark side. So it's kind of like this concept of a black hole, and this applies to everyone, whether it's UX or not. I don't know of a single workplace that isn't like this, and if there is, please let me know because I'm interested. There's this concept of all the time, resources, energy typically go this way, and meanwhile, the only thing shooting out is more work, right? I think everyone's kind of experienced that if they've been in a normal job anywhere. Literally, whether it's programming or otherwise, it's the same thing across the board. So any way we can mitigate these right here and not have to worry about that is going to be great, right? It's going to be the best thing in the world. So this is kind of like the horrible black hole optimization, because the more work you do, obviously the less time that you can use for optimization, and all of your resources aren't dedicated to it. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of a use case that we do where I work, Randall Riley. So my team is kind of faced with the same challenge. All of this stuff takes time, every single one of it. Like research takes a ton of time, especially if you do in-depth interviews, it takes time. If you're doing actual development on like before it even starts, like if you're working on some sort of prototype, that takes time. So what happens if you don't have time? You don't have time for meetings, you don't have time for research. Maybe you do sparsely. You kind of feel like this guy. So you're faced with this monumental force that really sucks. And like I said, I like Star Wars. So this guy against these, right? So that really sucks. And not only that, he's not even running the same direction for some reason. I don't know why, but he's running like sideways instead of away. Maybe something's over there. I don't know. If you play Battlefront, I think Hangar's that way. So yeah, that's right. So you feel like this guy, like he's not even running the correct way and he still has all these issues. That's what you feel like. You have no time, no resources, you can't do anything. So what do? That's kind of what we face. Let me back up and say that I don't care about your opinion. I care about data. I don't care about what the blogs say because half of them just repeat what the other blog said, or 5 other blogs said. I don't care his opinion, and I definitely don't care about the client because if any of you have worked with clients, their opinion should just go off the board half the time. I care about the data. What the data tells me is what I go off of because that's the only way that we're going to know for sure that the decisions we're making is correct, is going by the data. So I say go with your gut and then use the actual data to validate it and go with it. If it's wrong, so be it, but at least you did what you thought was right and then learn from your data and then you can start improving things. So with that, so here's some examples of why I would be running away from a giant hulk of metal that's trying to shoot at me. Limited time, so 3 to 5 days maybe. Say you had to build a whole project, 3 to 5 days. Maybe you have limited time running, so you're trying to optimize something, make it better, improve it, whether this is user experience or otherwise. You're just trying to improve some process. And you have like less than a month. Okay, that's great. Limited audience, so maybe you're doing user testing, but you have less than 1,000 people to test with. So most of your results are not going to be valid because that's a hugely, it's awful. It's a really small amount of people to test with. Limited resources, so maybe you're working on 10 different projects at the same time. 300 to 1,000 products produced per month, maybe. Sounds kind of crazy, but it's possible. And then maybe no dedicated UX person. So maybe the person that's actually doing UX or whatever task that you're trying to do, maybe it's not even their job. It's just like, hey, my boss says that I have to do it now, so I'm the UX guy. All right. That happens more often than you think. So what if, for instance, all of these applied? And that's kind of what my group's at, where I work. So all these things kind of apply in one way or the other. Some maybe not so extreme in some instances and maybe more extreme in others, but we're kind of charged with this same situation, but all at once. So it would apply if you had either 1 or 2 of those things, but all of them at once is horrible. So here's some suggestions. So if you're faced with this limited time frame, 3 to 5 days, one of the best things to do, well, first of all, it's really difficult to optimize. Just like I said, a small user sample is really hard to do anything with, whether it's programming a tool for someone or actually getting validation by people actually using the product that you spent a year on. It's really hard to actually see whether people will truly benefit from it or not, or ways to improve it in such a short amount of time. So what I would say is focus on the known data that you already have from other projects. So maybe that one project you're working on is not really significant enough time or not significant enough data. Hopefully you've already done some of this in the planning, but if you're really fast paced, you might not have already. But optimize based on those kind of data points that you already know inherently from your other stuff. So don't focus on a specific persona in particular. I said that people will name these people and they'll give them traits and they'll give them statistics and everything. Don't focus on the actual persona, focus on the data points associated with that persona. I'll explain that a little bit. So you can't really do like interviews, crowdsourcing, ways to do research in a traditional method. UX person would crowdsource stuff. They would talk one-on-one with someone to get kind of their viewpoints about the way something works or not. You can't really do that at all. So what you can do is, for instance, use historical device data usage. That's arbitrary. That's not going to be tied to any specific persona. It's kind of across the board. It's not going to be tied to your specific campaign.
it will apply to any individual across any sort of campaign ever, if it's specific data usage. So something that's kind of product agnostic, if you will. So persona based on data, like focus on mobile. So if you were to find out that a previous product that you worked on had specific points that you found out about mobile usage, well, you should also try to apply those to this new one. And that's better to use rather than trying to focus on some psychographic data that might or might not be accurate because you don't have enough time to actually validate it. So focus on the data hard points, not the theoretical soft points. So here's kind of an example of like a traditional versus fast build. So traditional, you do like user personas, you do wireframes, user flows, iteration. I'd say to heck with that. Use the same thing that you did with your last one and test it up against something new. So don't spend all your time planning and coming up with new ways to do it, and then all of your time's gone because you've already planned it. Build something new and test it. That's the big thing with rapid iteration is you want to test big and test different. So take what I've already known, compare it against something that's completely different that I think is going to be equally or better successful, and see what your comparisons are there. If you change one little thing, you're not going to be able to compare because you don't have enough time to. If you compare two big different things, then you will be able to see a difference, or at least see that they're very similar. You'll know real fast if you failed or not. So for instance, this could be used like, research industry, trends, historical data, all that takes time, a lot of in-depth interviews with people and stuff. And then historical device usage, of what I already said, which you already have. It takes a very small algorithm or even just looking at Google Analytics if it's a web project or something to figure it out. So the key here is to run those project agnostic tests. So if you are focused on the data side of what you already know, you're going to be way better off. It's going to apply to a million projects. It doesn't matter what company it's for, it doesn't matter what product you're actually building. If you focus on those actual data points, it's going to make more sense. And you'll get much more benefit out of it for your time. The other thing is use volume to your advantage. So we're running these rapid iterations over and over and over again. So use that volume to your advantage. You can't test everyone specifically, but you can aggregate data based on all those tests to actually come up with a conclusion. So we actually use a tool called Optimizely. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's one of like the best ones out there for optimization of web products in particular. But they actually have a tool that will gauge your statistical accuracy that it is correct with its optimization like percentage. So say I have 3% and it says that this other iteration is going to be 4%, it'll give me a statistical percentage of how accurate that rating is. Typically it's like 90, you'd go to 95. But the only problem is it takes, I don't know, testing 85,000 people to get to 95%. I don't have that time. I don't have that luxury because my campaign's going to be out in a month and I'm going to get 2,000 people. So how do I actually know? Well, the key is not to trying to focus on that in particular. It has another breakdown that essentially shows the relative accuracy of what you're doing. So it's not like a particular hard yes or no, but it is kind of an indicator. So what I can do is I can say, I'm going to do a test on this. Relatively, it'll say that it's better or not, but if I spread that over 5 different tests, then I'll definitely know that it is better because all 5 of those tests said that it was probably better, so therefore I know. So I can't actually have hard evidence on my one project that this is definitely better. But if I do 5 different tests on 5 different campaigns or products, whatever, and they're all based on the same functionality, and all of them kind of lean towards better, then I know statistically that it's probably going to be true that it's better. So scale is not always a horrible thing. We build stuff to massive scale all the time, but we can't really focus on these individual campaigns because they don't get enough traffic. So what we do is we spread it out. So Optimizely is the best one out there. There's a bunch of them out there. If you're interested in doing anything for your freelance project, whatever, you can get crazy good conversions if you just do a little bit of testing. It's amazing what
moving, some content from one part of the page to the other part of the page will actually do. It could raise your conversion rates, by 5%. So you never know. Just moving a single picture can do that. And we've seen a lot of indications of that as well. So this goes along with what I was saying. Test by modules, not by templates. And what I mean is templates, you can think of an aggregation of multiple modules. Think of a template. It's got a bunch of different pieces of the puzzle. Each of those pieces have different functionality or different content sets. So you can think of a template as a bunch of modules that make up the whole. So test by the module. So you might have a specific functionality. It might be designed slightly different or have different features, whatever. But it's in part kind of the same in a lot of ways. And like I said, if you test that specific piece of the puzzle, whether it's your software program or a web design program or something, if you test that piece of the puzzle multiple times on multiple different projects, you will get a strong indication whether it's good or bad. It won't be a specific percentage, but you'll actually see whether it's good or bad. Don't test the whole template. So don't take your whole template or your whole project, your whole software, and then come up with a different version and test it, decide it, and expect it to run for 2 years, because that's just not viable. Test those little pieces of the puzzle, and you'll do well, as long as it's specific functionality. So don't do like general design principles or outlier cases. So for instance, a good example is someone will do, when they first get optimization, they might be like, hey, I'm going to test the difference between this sentence and the sentence that has a word removed. That's okay, that's great, but plan on waiting 15 years to see whether that's actually gonna make a difference or not, because it's not a big change. It has to be a big change. Do big changes. Change the world for your design or your product, or completely change your content, completely change your audience, and see what that actually affects. Because if you do those big changes, you're gonna have a very fast indication whether it's good or bad, and you're not gonna have to wait a long time. So don't do like, well, I'm going to change this button color to green or red. You can do that if you have 1 million people going to your site every month. You can do that. Fine. If you have 200 people, good luck. I wish you the best. I'll see you in 8 years. So don't do that. So do big changes and then focus on the commonality between all of those. So I don't know how many of y'all actually do any user experience stuff or testing or optimization. I know we're all nerds here. We have a lot of developers here. But I will say this. Typically, the user experience program in general, they focus on a lot of finite details, and they go through the whole process start to finish. It's kind of great in a playbook, but when you're actually on the field and you're actually doing it, sometimes you got to do a lot faster. You got to iterate. You've got pressure to finish the project. It's not going to be all great and wonderful, and you're not going to have time to actually do the things that you want to do. Or maybe it's a freelance project, and it's just on the side. You want to make it better, but you don't have a lot of time. So I would challenge you to make those big changes, iterate out, and not have to sit there for 10 years to see whether it's better. Test bold. Make the big things, not the little things, and always trust in the data, because data is the key. I don't care if your design looks beautiful. All I care about is whether it converts, because that's its purpose. And I really don't care if the picture's pretty. I care if you make me money, and that's the way the world works. So trust in the data, not in beauty, and don't listen to what your boss says. Just trust in the data. So anyways, y'all have any questions? Yes.
So if I tell my boss what you just said,
do it, and then have the data to back it up, saying that you're right. That's, yep. Okay, yeah. So the question was, can I tell my boss this? And yes, you can, but make sure you have the data to back it up.
so you let your employees say that to you?
So he asked me if I let my employees say that to me. Yes, if they have the data. Most definitely. I would encourage people to prove me wrong, because if they prove me wrong and have the data back it up, more than likely I'm going to win, because we're all going to make more money. So.
How frequently do they do that? Do they come with metrics to you and say, hey, look?
How frequently do they do that? Not actually as much as I'd like. I'd actually love it if every day someone came to me and said, you're doing it wrong. I found out this amazing new thing and it's way better and we should do that. Because that means that obviously they're proactive. They're getting the data. They're testing a lot more than they should. They're going above and beyond. So I would love it. I know a lot of bosses out there wouldn't, but.
What sort of metrics tooling do you use as the software? You mentioned metrics as well as.
So what metrics we use? Yeah, we use a variety of different things. We've got some proprietary measuring stuff. We use Optimizely. Your typical like Google Analytics. We do campaigns through a bunch of different platforms like AdWords and everything. Those all have metrics. And there's a lot of data aggregators out there that can pull from all the different sources and then actually come up with conclusions from them. So there's a lot that you can do with testing that incorporates your campaigns that are running or incorporates your usage data from a specific mailer client or whatever. There's a lot of services out there that just hook into a million APIs and give you a pretty dashboard. So definitely utilize those. Yes.
You mentioned going big with your testing,
yes.
But also the constraint of having limited resources and limited time. So how do you balance that?
So the question is, how do you balance doing big changes with limited time? That's the joy about doing big changes. It's not like the stuff that user experience goes through. It kind of has the luxury that a lot of things that you can do are very small, but they make big changes. So it's not so much like development where someone requests a feature and they don't understand that that's going to take 8 months of development because it's more than just moving a button or something. User experience stuff, you can make a big impact just by changing little things. We specifically did a site design that was completely different. It targeted completely different audience, but it really didn't take that much because it was front-end design. The copywriting was different. The design was different. We used different imagery. We shifted some stuff around on the page. It made a tremendous impact. So in our instance, it improved conversions by about 8%. So just that little bitty change that you do can make a big impact. I say little bitty. I mean, it took one person's time to do that for a while, but pretty small in the spectrum of changing a whole product or service or something. Just even targeting a different audience demographic can make a big change, just in the way that you go after people, or increasing your usability on mobile or something like that. Working with a user interface designer to actually improve that quality and improve page load time or something can make a tremendous impact. So,
right, I'm coming from this complete ignorance, but
sure.
I'm trying to see how, say in website design, how you're constraining all these different variables of time. What news story just popped up on people's screens? Why there's so many things that are driving people that you can't really know. In this, do you ever have two parallel websites in the same? So you're driving half your traffic.
Okay, so about how we actually do testing in particular. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's different algorithms out there. Google has built-in experiments, which you can do really easily. And their experiments, you can literally make 2 pages and then pop in the code there, and it will send people to either one. And its algorithm will actually change traffic based on conversion rates. So you can set up a goal on both of them. Say that in our instance, the goal is to fill out a form. So what you can do is you can set the goal to get to a confirmation page or fill out a form or whatever. And then based on how many people do it in test A versus B, it will actually change and serve the page dynamically different amounts to validate that. And so it'll actually speed up your time, because It doesn't have to do it exactly 50-50. The way it works is it'll serve up more to validate, and the more it serves, I don't know Google's algorithms, but it's actually a lot smarter than doing 50-50. The way that Optimizely works, it's 50-50. You can do a bunch of different ways, and you can hook into a bunch of other third-party stuff. But it is like a 50-50. You can change specific things on the page in that platform, or you can send them to a completely different page. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but I said don't do really finite things, but if you wanted to test whether a button is better green or red, you would be able to take your control and then do a variable or a multivariate test. You can do 4 different other colors, and you can change the color on each one of them, and it will serve that content to each individual differently based on whatever they place that set in. And there's all sorts of super refined controls. I can actually change my target for that campaign specifically to a different variable based on whether or not you contain my cookie or not. So I can do cookie targeted lists. I can do device targeted stuff. Just anything and everything, there's a tool out there to do. So if you want to test a very specific demographic with your cookie set on this device, this time, this geolocation, you can do it. And you can serve up completely different content. So say we wanted to see the effectiveness of maybe a design where we had this crazy concept of, hey, let's serve a different look of this website for this club that also does lunch. Let's serve the nighttime look as very like club, nighttime, cool, maybe got some like lights, neon going on, versus during the daytime whenever it's chill and they've got like acoustics playing and they have a lunch special. Maybe you want to serve those 2 different times. Well, based on the time of day, you can set up a filter to serve that nighttime look at night and test whether you get better conversions because you serve that nighttime one at that time. There's a million different ways to do it. So the sky is the limit when it comes to testing.
This is kind of a complicated and big question, so I don't want you to spend too much time on it, but what's your favorite Star Wars?
Favorite Star Wars?
That's very complex.
This is animated series.
Animated series. I'm just gonna rule out 1, 2, 3. I'll go with probably Han Solo, and that's probably why I like Firefly so much, because Firefly is pretty much the adventures of Han Solo in a different realm. And with that, I will say, yes, I believe in the conspiracy theory that Indiana Jones movies is just Han Solo's dreams while he's frozen in carbonite. So I will go ahead and say that. Inner Nerd just came out. So excited. How many of y'all are actually going to see Star Wars?
That's not a question.
Okay. Okay, how many of y'all are actually dressing up for midnight? I have no clue yet. That's a good question.
You make a good like.
Yeah, I would. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes.
Any other questions? Questions? Well, thank you all so much for having me. I hope you learned a little bit. It might not have applied directly, but I think a lot of the touch points are true to any profession. Just if you're going to test something in any sort of scenario, test the big things. Don't test the little things, because you're going to know right away whether you're completely screwing up or not. That's the big thing. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it.